His father disappeared in 1997. No body, no goodbye, no trace. Just a wristwatch ticking on the kitchen counter. For 28 years, no one knew what happened. Until last week, when he was found alive, living under a new name. But why did he vanish? And what was he hiding all these years? The truth is far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from? The snow hadn't fallen yet, but winter had already arrived in Duluth. It came silently, not with a blizzard, but with a stillness that pressed against the skin. A hush so complete it made the old wooden steps of the public library seem louder than they should have been. The sky, pale and colorless, looked like a blank page someone had forgotten to write on. And as the cold crept into the cracks of every brick building downtown, something else began to stir. Something older than the lake wind and heavier than the clouds above. Daniel stood on the corner of Superior Street and Lake Avenue, unmoving. In his right hand, a folded piece of paper. In his left coat pocket, something he hadn't touched in nearly 3 decades, a battered, dog-eared postcard from Chicago. The image on the front had long faded, but he knew every detail by heart. Navy Pier, summer. A red Ferris wheel, almost cartoonish now in its discoloration. On the back, his father's handwriting, a single sentence that never made sense. You won't find me where the light falls, only in the shadow of the wheel. He was 5 years old when his father vanished, not left, not disappeared with luggage or a goodbye, vanished like breath on glass. One moment he was there, tickling Daniel behind the ears, promising pancakes and cartoons. The next morning, only his watch remained, still ticking on the kitchen counter. Daniel remembered the ticking. He remembered because he hated it. Because it was the only sound in the house that morning. He blinked against the wind now, 28 years later, in a city his father had no known connection to. But he was here. Daniel had no doubt. And for the first time in nearly 3 decades, he wasn't following hope. He was following evidence. But the evidence wasn't police-issued. It wasn't a fingerprint or a DNA match. It was something simpler, more fragile, a name, Rick Dawson. A week ago, an old man named Rick had checked into the ER of St. Luke's Hospital after a mild heart attack. Routine case. But a nurse, a local with a hobby of collecting vintage postcards, had noticed something odd. The man had a photograph taped inside his wallet. A child around 5 standing in front of a Ferris wheel. And on the back, that same cryptic sentence. Only in the shadow of the wheel. The nurse didn't say anything at first, just went home. Thought about it. Thought about how strange it was that someone would keep a photo like that for so long. She posted it online, just a blurry image, half-cropped, in a forum for vintage card collectors. She called it the Ferris Clue. Daniel wasn't even on the forum. It was his friend Emily who saw it, a former classmate turned amateur sleuth who remembered his story, remembered the disappearance, remembered the postcard. She sent it to him with only 3 words. Daniel, it's him. He didn't believe it. Until he did, until he remembered the handwriting. And now, here he was. Across the street, through the condensation on the library windows, Daniel could see the old man, seated alone at a table near the archives, hunched over a stack of newspapers from the 90s. His movements slow, deliberate, as if time moved differently for him, as if he knew it was catching up. Daniel didn't go inside yet. He wasn't ready. The last time he had seen his father's face, it was on a grainy home video digitized by a college friend during finals week. In the video, they were in the backyard. A red balloon floated upward. His father, young, clean-shaven, smiling with his whole face, pointed at it and said, "Make a wish, Danny." He never heard what wish he made, but the video had a sound, a moment no one else noticed. his father saying under his breath, almost inaudible, "I'm sorry, I have to go." Daniel had paused the video over and over, trying to convince himself he had imagined it. But deep down, he knew his father had left, on purpose. And now he was living with a different name. The wind picked up, brushing a single leaf across the wet sidewalk. Daniel crossed the street, each footstep echoing in his chest. He paused at the library entrance. The smell of old paper and dust hit him instantly, oddly comforting. He scanned the room, still there. Same table, same man. But he didn't look up, not once. Daniel took the long way through the stacks, past biographies and outdated encyclopedias, around the children's section where faded beanbags sat like tired animals. He needed time to breathe, to think, to not scream. A single creak under his shoe made the old man lift his head, and in that instant, everything inside Daniel broke open. It was him. The eyes were older, the hair grayer. But the curve of the brow, the tired slope of the shoulders, the way his left hand trembled just slightly, it was him. Rick Dawson, or Peter Hughes, his father. Daniel couldn't move, couldn't speak. He felt something tighten around his chest, like invisible wires pulling in every direction. The man, Peter, Rick, looked at him as if he were a ghost. Their eyes met for 4 seconds. Then the man stood, slowly. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He reached into his coat, pulled out something, a chain. On it, a small brass medallion. Daniel froze. He knew that medallion. It had his initials on the back. D.H. Daniel Hughes. The man whispered, "I've waited too long." Fade to black, sound of ticking, then silence. Daniel Hughes had always been quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from shyness, but the kind that is learned, the kind that grows in a house where people speak in whispers after a storm, the kind that fills the gaps left by someone who never says goodbye. He was 5 years old when his father disappeared. One moment, Peter Hughes was standing at the stove, flipping pancakes in his faded Chicago Bears sweatshirt. The next, he was just gone. No note, no arguments, no accidents. Just a morning silence broken only by the ticking of a wristwatch left behind on the kitchen counter. That watch, still ticking, would become Daniel's most vivid memory of his father. Not his face or his laugh or the way he always smelled faintly of motor oil. Just that sound, tick, tick, tick. For years, Daniel would wake up expecting to hear it again, hoping to believe it had all been some mistake. But that hope faded the way childhood always does. Quietly, painfully, and long before you realize it. Now Daniel was 33, a history teacher at Lincoln High School in Nashville, Tennessee. He lived alone in a modest apartment filled with books, framed photos of his students' field trips, and a collection of vintage maps that covered his walls like stories waiting to be rewritten. He wasn't married. He had no children, no pets. His life was simple and quiet, always quiet. He didn't date often, not because he didn't want to, but because small talk felt like lying. How do you explain over coffee that every meaningful part of your life is defined by a man who disappeared in 1997, that you've spent your entire existence trying to solve a mystery no one else believed in? Daniel taught high schoolers about civilizations that collapsed, wars that changed borders, presidents who rewrote history with a sentence. But in his own story, nothing moved. His life had no clear battle lines. Just a missing person poster that had yellowed in his memory and a question that had never been answered. Why did he leave? His students liked him. He taught with passion. He used timelines like puzzles, war maps like novels. He made the past feel personal, and that made kids care, even the ones who usually didn't. But no one really knew him, not fully, not even his mother. Susan Hughes still lived in the same single-story house where Daniel grew up. It sat near the edge of town, its porch paint peeling, its front steps cracked by time and weather. She kept a small garden, read mystery novels, and spoke about her husband the way people speak about car accidents, as something that happened to them, not with them. She never told Daniel everything. He could feel it. She said Peter was under a lot of pressure, that work had gotten strange near the end, that he started staying out later, talking in whispers on the phone, locking drawers that were once left open. But when pressed for details, she always had the same answer. He loved you. That's what matters. Daniel never accepted that. Because if his father loved him, why didn't he come back? He'd asked that question once, on his 12th birthday. It had rained all day. The cake was store-bought. His mom tried her best, but her smile had cracked around the edges. That night, Daniel asked again, "Do you think he's dead?" Her answer still echoed in his chest. "I think he's gone. There's a difference." And there was. There always was. Daniel spent most of his 20s pretending he didn't care anymore. He focused on college, then his master's degree. He poured himself into teaching, into being the one consistent adult figure in the lives of kids who, like him, were missing someone. But every year, on the anniversary of the disappearance, July 9th, he'd take the day off and drive. No destination. Just hours on the road, chasing the memory of a man who'd walked out of one life and possibly into another. That year, the 28th anniversary, something changed. It started with an old VHS tape. Daniel had gone back to his childhood home to help his mother clean the garage. In a dusty box labeled Summer 96-97, he found the tape. Faded marker, Daniel's 5th birthday. He almost didn't play it. He already knew the contents by heart. But something made him take it. He digitized it later that week, playing it on his laptop as the rain tapped against his windows. There was his father, smiling, alive, real. The camera shook with laughter. Peter Hughes had that youthful warmth that made people trust him. He wore sunglasses on his head, a goofy apron over his jeans, and had lifted Daniel onto his shoulders just as the cake came out. And then, a detail Daniel had never noticed before. At the very end of the tape, after the cake, after the guests had left, his father stood alone in the backyard. The camera was still rolling, forgotten. Peter turned to face it. His face was serious, almost frightened, and he whispered something. Daniel rewound the footage, over and over. He increased the audio, ran it through filters. Finally, he heard it, soft and almost broken. "I'm sorry. I don't have a choice." He paused the video. The same moment his phone buzzed, a text from Emily, an old friend from college who knew his story, his obsession. She was a true crime blogger now, always digging through online forums, always looking for patterns. "You need to see this," she wrote. "It's him." She sent a screenshot from a vintage postcard forum. Someone had posted a blurry photograph of a man's wallet found at a hospital in Duluth, Minnesota. Inside was a postcard from Chicago, Navy Pier, red Ferris wheel. And written on the back, "You won't find me where the light falls, only in the shadow of the wheel." Daniel's hands went numb. That was the same message on the postcard he'd kept for 28 years, the one he thought meant nothing. He opened the drawer of his desk, took out the worn card. The handwriting was identical. But it wasn't just that. The photo, barely visible in the post, showed the wallet owner. A man in his 50s, gray-bearded, eyes hidden behind glasses. But Daniel could feel it, that posture, that look, his father, alive, living under a new name. The name registered at the hospital was Rick Dawson. No listed relatives, no emergency contact, no social security number prior to 1999. Daniel couldn't breathe. He booked a flight the next day. Daniel arrived in Duluth 2 days later. He didn't tell his mother. He didn't tell anyone but Emily. The air was colder than Nashville. The streets were unfamiliar, but something about the lake made him feel like he was walking toward something ancient, not just a man, but the truth. He spent hours walking through the neighborhoods, tracing the address listed on the hospital forms. A small gray building, ground floor. A mailbox labeled R. Dawson, no lights on. He waited. For hours he saw him, briefly, leaving with a canvas bag, limping slightly, older, slower. But it was him. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. The next morning, he followed the man to the public library, watched him scan old newspapers, watched the way his hands trembled when he turned pages from the 1990s, saw the brass chain around his neck, a familiar shine. And then, that moment, face to face, the man's expression, shock, sorrow, recognition, all tangled together. He reached into his coat and pulled out the chain. Daniel saw the charm. His initials, D.H., a gift from his father. The same one he thought he'd lost the day the man vanished. And for the first time in his life, Daniel's silence cracked. Not into tears, but into breath, into a single word. Why? Daniel had always imagined this moment, the day he'd finally see his father again. But nothing prepared him for how small the man looked. Not physically, though time had thinned his frame and curled his spine slightly, but emotionally. The man who once lifted Daniel into the air with ease now seemed like a shadow of himself, hesitant, hollow. "I didn't think," the man began, his voice gravelly and unsure. "Didn't think you'd ever find me?" Daniel didn't answer. Couldn't. His throat clenched around every word he wanted to scream. Instead, he sat across from the man, Rick Dawson, Peter Hughes, whoever he really was, at the wooden library table. There were no hugs, no tears, just the sterile scent of old paper and the weight of unfinished decades. "Where have you been?" Daniel finally asked. It came out dry, controlled, nothing like he imagined. The man stared down at his trembling hands. "I wasn't supposed to exist anymore," he said, and just like that, the questions poured in. Why the new name? Why Duluth? Why the postcard? Why disappear and never call? But Peter didn't give full answers, only fragments, as if telling the truth might unravel him completely. "I thought I was protecting you," he whispered. "They said it was the only way." They. That word stuck with Daniel. Who were they? He pushed carefully, like walking across thin ice. But Peter changed the subject, started talking about Daniel's childhood, memories he shouldn't have had access to. "You had that stuffed elephant, remember? Blue, one eye missing. You wouldn't sleep without it." Daniel flinched. That detail was never in photos, never on video. He had forgotten it himself, until now. His mind churned. Where had this man been watching from? Later that night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He walked along the edge of Lake Superior, boots crunching over frozen leaves. The wind off the water bit through his jacket, but he barely noticed. He felt something was wrong, not just weird. Wrong. His father hadn't looked shocked to see him, not really. More like he had been expecting it, like this meeting had been choreographed, planned. And then there was the medallion, the one Daniel had been given as a child, lost the same week Peter vanished. How had he gotten it? Had Peter come back, entered the house, taken it? Daniel's memories of that time were fuzzy. His mother never talked about it, said she didn't want to reopen old wounds. But maybe they were never really closed. The next day, Daniel visited the apartment building listed on the hospital form. Rick Dawson's name was still on the mailbox. Apartment 2C. The door was locked, no answer. Daniel stood there for 5 minutes before the building's maintenance guy came down the hallway, an older man in overalls carrying a ladder and a dripping paint bucket. "You looking for Rick?" he asked without much interest. Daniel hesitated. "Yeah, I'm a relative." The man squinted. "You don't look like him? But then again, nobody here really knows Rick. Quiet guy, pays rent in cash, always reading the newspaper, keeps to himself. Daniel nodded. Do you know how long he's lived here? The man wiped his hands on a rag. 8, 9 years, maybe. Before that, I think he came from Michigan, or maybe Canada, not sure. Doesn't talk much, but nice enough. Quiet. Again, with the quiet. Daniel thanked him and left. But as he turned the corner, something made him stop. Across the street, tucked between 2 laundromats, was a tiny used bookstore. Its front window was filled with old history textbooks and faded biographies. And in the very center, beneath a yellowing sign that read, Back in Time Books, sat something that froze Daniel in place. A photo, inside a frame, leaning behind the glass. A still from a 1996 birthday video. His 5th birthday. Daniel walked in. The bell jingled overhead. A woman in her 60s looked up from the counter. Need help? He walked straight to the window. Where did you get that photo? She smiled. That one? Oh, Rick brought that in years ago. Said it reminded him of his son. Never told me much, though. I always liked it. Felt nostalgic. Daniel's stomach dropped. Do you know where he got it? She shrugged. Said it was a still from an old VHS. I guess he digitized it? Daniel couldn't speak. That video had never been online. It had sat in his mother's garage for decades. He'd only converted it 2 weeks ago. So how did his father have that photo from a moment he shouldn't have had access to? That night, Daniel broke. He called his mother. It was the first time they'd spoken since he flew to Minnesota. Her voice trembled when she picked up. Daniel? I found him, he said. He's alive. A long silence. I know, she whispered. Daniel froze. What? Her breath shook. I didn't want you to get hurt. I thought it was better if you didn't know. Daniel couldn't process the words. You knew he was alive? Another pause, then. He sent me a letter a few years after he disappeared, said he was safe, that he had to leave. That people were after him, that if I loved him, I wouldn't look, that if I ever told you, he'd vanish again. This time, for good. Daniel's mind reeled. His mother had known, for years, and she had said nothing. I hated him for it, she added softly. I hated myself for not telling you, but I was scared, and he sounded desperate. Daniel hung up without saying goodbye. He didn't cry, not yet. The next morning he returned to the library. Peter wasn't there. He asked the librarian, a woman in her 40s who wore thick glasses and a cardigan with owls on it. Rick Dawson? She said. He used to come daily, but I haven't seen him since Tuesday. He usually checks out old newspapers, sometimes the microfilm. Daniel asked to see the records. She hesitated, then shrugged. It's public info. She pulled up a list. Peter had been researching specific dates. Always in the summer. Always in 1997. Daniel noted them down. July 3rd, July 7th, July 8th, July 9th. The days before and after he disappeared. What was he looking for? He dug into the microfilm himself. Most of it was local news, festival schedules, weather, minor crime reports. But on July 9th, there was a police notice, one he had never seen before. A man found dead in a burned-out car outside Nashville. No ID, no dental records. Estimated time of death, early morning. The article said police suspected arson. No further investigation. Daniel felt cold all over. Could it be? Had someone staged a body to look like his father? Or had someone died in his place? He scanned the article again. A single sentence stood out. An unrecognizable body was discovered with only a charred wristwatch found nearby. A wristwatch? His father's wristwatch? The same one Daniel remembered hearing tick on the kitchen counter? Or was that memory false? Was the watch placed there after the fire? Nothing made sense. Daniel felt the walls closing in. The postcard. The VHS photo. The hidden research. The staged fire. And his father? Gone again. But this time Daniel wasn't going to let him vanish. He tracked down a contact from Emily, a woman who worked for the Nashville PD and records. He asked about the 1997 fire. She sent him the old file. It was thin, too thin. No photos, no fingerprints, no autopsy report. Just a brief note. Case closed. Presumed suicide. But suicide by who? Daniel called Emily. I think someone helped him disappear, he said. And I think someone died in his place. Emily was silent then. Daniel, there's something else. What? She sent a photo. It was blurry, from a security camera, taken last year in a town outside Chicago. It showed Rick Dawson, Peter, sitting in a diner, across from a man in a black suit. Daniel zoomed in. He recognized the man, not from real life. From a newspaper article Emily had sent him months ago, a former FBI agent, disgraced, resigned in 1998. A man who specialized in witness protection. Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat at the edge of the motel bed, shoes still on, elbows on his knees. The television buzzed with static in the background, a forgotten screen. A half-eaten granola bar lay on the nightstand, untouched, for hours. His eyes were locked on the photograph Emily had sent, the one of Peter sitting in that Chicago diner across from a man in a black suit. The timestamp was from 11 months ago. The location, Joliet, Illinois. The man sitting across from his father was former FBI agent Robert Keller. Daniel had dug through every public record he could find in the last 24 hours. Keller had resigned in 1998, just 1 year after Peter's disappearance, after being connected to an off-the-record relocation operation. He was never prosecuted. The case was buried under bureaucracy. But Daniel was sure of it now. His father hadn't disappeared. He had been erased. And maybe not for his own protection. Daniel drove to Joliet 2 days later. It was a small industrial town with aging factories and railroad lines. The diner still stood, Gracie's painted mint green, with booths that hadn't been reupholstered since the late 70s. A bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. A woman in her 50s greeted him behind the counter. "Coffee?" she offered. Daniel nodded. "Black. And I was hoping you might recognize someone." He pulled out the photo. Her brow furrowed. "Him," he pointed at his father, "or the man across from him. This was taken here last year." She squinted. "That's Rick. Comes through every few months. Quiet. Orders a ham sandwich. No tomato. Never talks much. And the other man," she hesitated. "I've seen him once or twice. Maybe FBI or something. Has that look?" "Do you know where Rick goes after he visits here?" "No idea. But he always paid cash. Always tipped well." Daniel left his number, thanked her, and walked back to the parking lot. He was starting to understand. His father had been moving in a pattern, a loop, Chicago, Duluth, Nashville, possibly more, always circling something or someone. Back in his motel room, Daniel laid everything out on the table, maps, photos, notes from the 1997 case file, screenshots of news clippings. One headline from the Nashville Ledger, dated June 1997, caught his eye. City comptroller linked to missing funds. Whistleblower rumored inside. He circled it. His father had worked in the finance office at the time. Could Peter have been the whistleblower? Was that the reason he vanished? Daniel needed answers. And there was only one person left who might hold them, Robert Keller. Finding Keller wasn't easy. He had no online presence, no listed address, no public statements since his resignation. But Emily, ever persistent, tracked down a P.O. box in Kenosha, Wisconsin, used in his name for receiving pension paperwork. Daniel drove there next. It was a long drive along empty highways, the gray sky pressing low above. He arrived late afternoon, staked out the box from across the street with a coffee in hand. 2 hours later, an older man approached, tall, stiff-backed trench coat, ball cap low over his eyes. Daniel followed at a distance. Keller didn't go far, just around the block, into a small cafe. Daniel followed, sat 2 tables behind. The moment felt surreal. He approached cautiously. "Mr. Keller?" The man froze mid-sip. "I need to ask you about Peter Hughes." Silence. Then the man exhaled. "You, his son?" Daniel nodded. Keller gestured to the seat across from him. "I wondered when you'd find me," he said. What followed was less confession than controlled release. Keller didn't admit to breaking laws, but he didn't deny them either. "Your father came to us in '97, he said. He had evidence of fraud, big, deep, people with power. He thought we'd help. Instead, some of us were already compromised." Daniel stared. Keller continued. "He wanted protection for his family. We said we could make him disappear safely, a new identity, new life. But the deal went sideways. Another agent, not me, leaked the plan." Daniel's chest tightened. "There was a threat, real one. Your father panicked. We had to improvise. That car fire outside Nashville wasn't staged. That was meant for him. Someone else died." Daniel felt sick. "Who?" "We never identified him. Likely a drifter. Wrong place, wrong time. And my father, he vanished on his own after that. We lost track. For years, he resurfaced later. Found me. Wanted to finish what he started." Daniel's voice was low. "So he left to protect us?" Keller nodded. "But that doesn't explain the postcard, the video still, the medallion." Keller finally looked up. "He never stopped watching you." Daniel returned to Duluth with more questions than answers. His father hadn't just disappeared. He had been hunted. But by who? The corruption case had never gone public. The comptroller in the article retired quietly in 2000. No charges were filed, no arrests. Whatever his father had been trying to expose had been buried. Daniel needed to go deeper. He returned to Nashville, to his childhood home. His mother wasn't expecting him. She opened the door with a hand over her heart. "Daniel." He walked past her, straight to the attic. She followed. "What are you looking for?" "The truth," he said. In a box marked Tax Files 1997, Daniel found them. Old bank statements, company memos, coded notes in his father's handwriting, and a journal. Inside were dates, names, account numbers. Every page documented money being funneled from city budgets into ghost accounts, fake vendors, fabricated construction projects. A hidden page in the back had one final line: "If this is found, trust no one, not even the police." Daniel held it in shaking hands. His father had been right all along. That night he returned to the motel and scanned every page. Sent copies to Emily. She confirmed that many of the fake companies still existed, some rebranded, some dormant. Daniel was close, too close. And that's when the warning came. A note slid under his motel room door. Typed, anonymous. "Stop digging, or you'll finish what your father started." The note slid under the motel room door was the kind that shouldn't have existed anymore. Anonymous. Untraceable. Menacing in its simplicity. "Stop digging, or you'll finish what your father started." Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Emily. "They know I'm here," he whispered, "and they know I know." Emily didn't hesitate. "You have to get out of there." "I can't. Not now." "You're in danger, Daniel." "I've been in danger since I was 5. I just didn't know it." He ended the call and stood by the window, watching shadows pass under the parking lot lights. He couldn't see anyone, but that didn't mean no one was watching. He packed everything, the copies of his father's journal, the scanned documents, the microfilm photos, and stashed it all in a secure Dropbox folder Emily had access to. If something happened to him, the truth would still survive. But Daniel wasn't leaving, not yet. The next day he returned to Back in Time Books, the small used bookstore where he'd first seen the photo of his 5th birthday. The owner, Margaret, recognized him instantly. "You're looking for Rick again?" "Yes," Daniel said. "He hasn't come back, has he?" She shook her head. "He told me once," she said softly, "that if a young man ever came asking about him, I should give him this." She reached under the counter and pulled out a worn leather envelope. Daniel opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. "Daniel, if you're reading this, then you know too much, and not enough. There are things I've never told you, things I couldn't. But if you really want the truth, all of it, there's only one place you need to go. The cabin, you know the one. I left the key where the memories live. Love, Dad." Daniel's heart stopped. The cabin. There had only been one cabin in his life. It belonged to his grandparents, on the edge of a forest in Laper's Fork, Tennessee, a small town southwest of Nashville. They used to visit it every summer until 1996, the year before his father vanished. The last time they were there, Daniel had fallen into the creek and split his chin open on a rock. His father had carried him the whole way back, singing under his breath. The cabin had been sold long ago, or so he thought. Daniel drove through the night. As he crossed into Tennessee, memories returned in flashes. The smell of pine, the sting of creek water, the sound of cicadas in July. The gravel road that led to the cabin was overgrown, but still passable. The house itself was smaller than he remembered. Weather-worn, faded red paint, a porch swing, rusted into silence. It looked abandoned, but when he stepped onto the porch, he saw it. Beneath the third plank, just where the boards creaked when stepped on barefoot, was a loose panel. He pried it open. The key was there, wrapped in a strip of cloth. Inside the cabin, everything was covered in dust and memory, but someone had been there recently. There was no electricity, but a lantern sat on the old table. The air smelled of oil and paper. Daniel walked through the rooms slowly, every floorboard groaning under his weight. In the bedroom closet hidden behind old coats was a metal lockbox. Inside, another journal. This one was not his father's. It belonged to Susan Hughes, his mother. The first entry was dated August 1997, 1 month after Peter disappeared. Daniel sat on the floor and began reading. He said they would come after me. He said if I ever told Daniel the truth, they would make it look like I had something to do with it. But I can't carry it anymore. Daniel's breath hitched. I knew about the corruption, not all of it, but enough. Peter confided in me too late. And when he said he was going to the FBI, I begged him not to. I told him they would kill him, that they would kill us. Daniel's hands trembled. The morning he left, he kissed Daniel goodbye and told me there was no safe way back. He said if I ever heard from him again, I should pretend I didn't, that our son deserved a life without looking over his shoulder. Daniel wiped his eyes. Then he turned to the last page. But I failed. I kept secrets. I let our son grow up thinking his father abandoned him. And now I think they know he's asking questions. I saw a car outside the house last night, just like back then. If anything happens to me, tell Daniel he was always loved. There was no date on that last entry. Just a smudge of ink, as if a tear had fallen before the pen could lift. Daniel sat in silence for a long time. Then he realized something. The handwriting. He'd seen it before, on an envelope mailed to their home in 2003, addressed to Susan Hughes, with no return address. His mother had said it was spam and thrown it away, but Daniel had kept it because the handwriting looked familiar. Now he knew why. He dug into his backpack, pulling out the old envelope he'd kept in a folder labeled Unexplained, same slant, same ink, same loops. His mother had written it, not a stranger, her. Which meant she'd been trying to tell him something for years. That night, Daniel called her. She picked up after 2 rings. "I found the journal," he said quietly. Silence. "I know," she whispered. "I hoped you would. Why didn't you tell me everything?" "I couldn't," she said. "I was afraid. They told me if I ever spoke, they'd make it look like I was guilty. Daniel's voice cracked. "But you let me think he left us." "I know, and I hate myself for it." A pause. "I loved him, Daniel, even after everything. But I loved you more, and I thought, if you hated him, at least you wouldn't look for him. At least you'd be safe." Daniel said nothing. She continued, "But I think it's too late now." "What do you mean?" "I saw the car again." Daniel returned to Nashville the next day. His mother was gone, the house unlocked, her purse still inside. No note. Only a single thing left on the kitchen table, the brass medallion, his initials, the same one his father had worn around his neck. He went to the police, filed a missing person report. They were polite but skeptical. "Maybe she went for a walk," Daniel insisted. "She didn't just leave." No one listened. Not really. Not until 2 days later, when a jogger found her car at the edge of a wooded trail, unlocked. Keys still inside, no sign of struggle, no Susan. And this time, no wristwatch ticking on the counter, just a note taped to the windshield. "You didn't stop digging." The last time Daniel saw his mother, she had kissed his forehead without a word. It wasn't unusual. She'd always been quiet in her love, subtle in affection, the kind of woman who left snacks in your bag without telling you, or folded your laundry with tucked corners even when angry. But that final kiss, it was different. He hadn't noticed it then. Now it haunted him. For the first time in his life, both of his parents were gone, one by choice, the other by force. The days after Susan's disappearance were a blur of reports, interviews, silence. Police combed the wooded trail. Volunteers searched the nearby ravine. Dogs sniffed the underbrush. Nothing. No phone signal. No credit card use. No movement. It was as if she had vanished into the same vacuum her husband had escaped from decades ago. Only this time Daniel knew better. This wasn't a disappearance. It was a warning. But he didn't back down. Instead, he made a decision. He would go public. Emily helped him. She compiled every document, the journal pages, the FBI name, the shell companies, the death that had been staged in place of Peter's own. They packaged the story with care, backing each fact with evidence, including the threats, the police dismissals, the VHS audio clip, and then they sent it to a journalist. Not just any journalist, Marion Blake, a Pulitzer-nominated reporter from the Tennessean, known for digging into state corruption and exposing cover-ups that had been sealed with force. Daniel met her in person. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, composed. She asked tough questions, verified facts, requested the originals, promised nothing. But when she read Susan's journal and the final tear-stained page, her hands visibly trembled. "We'll run this," she said. Daniel exhaled for the first time in days. The story went live the following Sunday. Front page, full spread. Vanished twice. How a Nashville whistleblower was silenced, and how his son fought back. It included photos of Daniel as a child, quotes from Susan's journal, a pixelated still of Peter and Keller in the diner. It didn't name names from the corruption ring, only referred to them as senior municipal officials. Legal reasons. But the damage was done. It was national within hours. CNN, MSNBC, NPR, Reddit, Twitter exploded. People remembered the case. That guy who vanished in '97, he was alive all along? Daniel didn't care about the attention. He cared about the pressure, and it worked. 2 weeks later, Daniel received an unmarked envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a flash drive. He ran it on a secure laptop. There was only one file, a video. It was shaky, filmed in secret, the angle off-center. But he recognized the location, a holding cell. Somewhere underground, dimly lit, cold, and in the frame, his mother, alive, gaunt, bruised but breathing. She looked directly at the camera, then a voice, distorted, masculine. "You want her back? Stop. Now, this is your only warning." The video cut. Daniel fell to the floor. She was alive. But for how long? He paced the room, fists clenched. For the first time in this journey, he didn't feel curiosity or grief or mystery. He felt rage. He picked up the phone and called the one person who might help. Robert Keller, the disgraced FBI agent, answered after 2 rings. "I saw it," Keller said before Daniel spoke. "They've gone too far." "You know where she is?" "I know where she was." "Help me," Daniel said, and Keller did. What followed felt like a movie Daniel never wanted to star in. Keller contacted a former ally, someone still embedded in federal intelligence, unofficially. Together, they traced the origin of the flash drive signal, a bounce between proxies, fake servers. But eventually it led to a warehouse facility near Paducah, Kentucky, owned by a private security firm with loose ties to state contracts. That was the location. They moved quickly. Daniel wasn't allowed to come. It crushed him. He waited at a diner near the county line, phone clutched in his hand, staring at the door every time someone entered. Hours passed. Then, a message. "We found her. Susan was hospitalized for a week. Severe dehydration. Bruising, but alive." When Daniel saw her in the recovery room, hooked to IVs, he fell apart. Not with words, with tears. For the first time since he was 5, he cried like a child, not quietly, not in control. His mother held his face in both hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "I forgive you." Peter never showed up again. Daniel didn't know if he was alive, watching from a distance, or already gone. But something told him. His father had made the final sacrifice. Maybe it was the photo that arrived 3 weeks later, a plain envelope, no note. Inside, a black and white picture of Navy Pier. On the back, "You found me once, that was enough. Live now, not in shadow. I'll always be watching." Dad. Daniel returned to teaching in the fall. His students were different, aware. Some asked questions, some didn't. But they looked at him with new eyes. He had survived something impossible. And come back whole, not because the truth fixed anything, but because he had stopped running from it. The fall leaves had turned to ash. Crimson, burnt orange, deep yellow. They blanketed the steps of the Lincoln High School courtyard like quiet applause. Daniel walked slowly between them, coffee in one hand, his satchel slung over his shoulder. It had been 3 months since the truth went public. 3 months since he last saw his father's face. 3 months since his mother whispered, "I'm sorry," from a hospital bed she barely made it out of. He felt older now, not in body, in soul, like something had been burned away, not lost, just changed. There was a new photo on Daniel's desk, not of Peter or Susan, not even of Daniel himself. It was a candid shot taken by one of his students. Daniel stood at the whiteboard, hand in motion, half smiling, his eyes full of focus, alive in a way he hadn't been for years. He looked at it every morning. It reminded him of something important, that life moved forward, even when history didn't. His mother had recovered slowly. She moved into a quiet assisted living cottage outside Nashville, where flowers bloomed year-round, and people called her Miss Susan. She never wanted the attention, refused all interviews. But every Friday, Daniel visited her. They sat on a bench near the rose garden, watched the birds, and sometimes, when it rained, just listened. Once she said something that stayed with him. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop needing answers. Daniel hadn't replied, but she was right. The city never reopened the 1997 corruption case officially. Too many years had passed, too many players had died, retired, or vanished. But Marion Blake's article had sparked public outrage, and a few doors were finally kicked open. Internal audits were ordered. One man resigned. Another was indicted for unrelated charges, but Daniel knew, he knew, and that was enough. Robert Keller disappeared again, just like Peter. One morning, Daniel received a letter, unsigned, postmarked from Alaska. Inside, "You saved your mother. Your father never stopped watching, and I don't regret helping you, not for a second." No return address. Daniel burned the letter after reading it. Some ghosts needed to stay buried. One night, Daniel sat alone in his apartment watching the old VHS of his 5th birthday again. He no longer cried during it. This time he smiled. His father twirled him around on his shoulders, laughing in the sunlight. That laugh had once been a wound. Now it was a memory, full and complete. And the truth was this: his father never stopped loving him. His mother never stopped protecting him. And Daniel, for the first time in his life, had stopped surviving. He was finally living. On the anniversary of Peter's disappearance, Daniel returned to Duluth. He stood at the edge of Lake Superior, wind cutting across the water, the air so still it almost echoed. In his coat pocket was the brass medallion D.H., polished now, warm from his touch. He took it out, kissed it once, and threw it into the lake, not to forget, to release. The sky cracked open above him, soft with the light of late afternoon, and for just a moment he swore he heard his father's voice in the wind. "Make a wish, Danny." Daniel closed his eyes. He didn't wish for the past. He didn't wish for answers. He wished for peace, and for the first time since 1997, he had it.